Welcome to ShockOrama, your source for all things shock, schlock, and just plain bizarre. I'm Ben Sherman, and today we're looking at a lesser-known 80s slasher called Moonstalker. Like many slashers of the late 80s, Moonstalker borrows generously from iconic movies like Friday the 13th and Halloween. But unlike many slashers, the comedy in this movie is fully intended. Moonstalker, or Camper Stamper as it was originally titled, was intended as a parody of the slasher genre by director Michael O'Rourke, who up until this point in his career had little experience in horror. But thanks to the passion and skills of the cast and crew, Moonstalker is a real hidden gem of a movie that delivers some truly memorable moments during its runtime. The story of how Moonstalker / Camper Stamper came about is also a strange one. Director Michael O'Rourke had received a Halloween-inspired screenplay from director of photography Michael Goy, and had set up a deal to shoot it in the UK with funding from several Irish breweries. However, the breweries got into a disagreement over who owned the rights to the movie, so the whole project ended up dead in the water. It was during this period of uncertainty, while he was still in the UK, that Michael O'Rourke wrote the screenplay for Camper Stamper and brought it back to the US to shoot. The film was cast primarily in Los Angeles, and then was shot entirely on location in Carson City, Nevada during the coldest part of the year. Though it didn't snow at all during filming, a blizzard had hit the area a couple days before the cast and crew arrived, leaving the entire shooting location covered in 4 feet of snow. On top of this, almost the entire movie had to be shot at night, meaning everyone had to deal with extreme cold temperatures throughout the 2 weeks of shooting.
We went to make the movie in Nevada, just outside of Reno, on this ranch called the Winters Creek Inn, in the dead of winter.
It is freaking cold, and I mean cold. Cold to where the breathing hurts. So brandy is what I use to counter that. A lot of good, strong brandy.
This could have been a recipe for disaster, if not for the fact that Michael O'Rourke and his cast and crew built an extremely strong camaraderie that lasted even years after the film came out. While doing research on this movie, I watched a making-of documentary produced by Vinegar Syndrome, who are also responsible for the restoration of the film that I used for this video. Throughout every interview in the documentary, I was struck by just how much everyone on set liked and respected one another, and it was great to see how excited they all were to talk about Moonstalker and relive these memories. So, without further ado, let's venture into the sometimes silly, sometimes scary, and always fun world of Moonstalker. The movie opens with a group of teenagers partying in the woods on a snowy night. The camera shows a POV shot as someone watches them from behind the trees. We watch together as a couple breaks off from the main group and heads out to a camper nearby. The mysterious figure picks up an axe and heads inside the camper, where he kills the couple off screen. Then we see him in silhouette as he stalks towards the other teenagers partying outside under the moonlight. You might even say he's a moonstalker. The next morning, in another part of the forest, we see a dad trying to get his grill working outside his family's camper. The family camping trip is easily my favorite part of the movie. The family dynamic comes across as very real, thanks in part to the lasting friendships made by the actors on set.
Michael O'Rourke really, and whoever helped cast the film, really, in my opinion, did a great job with our little core family of 4 people.
The dad is very excited about camping out in nature and getting away from all the lines and winos of LA. But the rest of his family is much less excited about being stuck in the freezing cold for their whole vacation. As the family eats their lunch outside, they see a car with a familiar-looking camper pull up the road. The dad gets upset because he had wanted his family to be alone at the campsite, so he goes over to talk to the old man in the car. The old man introduces himself as Bromley, but you can just call him Pop. Pop explains that he used to go fishing all the time in the area with his son. His story of father-son bonding and the great outdoors instantly wins the dad over, and Pop offers to pull his camper a bit farther up the road so the family can have their privacy. That night, the family goes over to eat dinner around the campfire with Pop. From interviews, I learned that there was an extra level of challenge for the actors in this scene. Because of the extreme cold, the actors were all wearing thermal layers under their costumes during this scene. And unfortunately, the material that these layers were made out of made a lot of noise anytime any of them moved. So the actors all had to stay as still as possible while shooting the scene to avoid messing up the audio. Pop talks at length about his son, whose name is Bernie, and admires the family's camper. The dad brags about how they have every appliance imaginable, like a portable TV set and a microwave. This sets off some more reminiscing from Pop, who explains that his son Bernie had always wanted to get his mother a microwave, but she died before he ever could. Some of the things Pop has been saying have been making the family uncomfortable, and eventually it even starts weirding out the dad, so they get up and make a hasty retreat back to their camper for the night. Pop brings some leftover cake into his camper and starts feeding it to his son Bernie, who it turns out has been chained up inside the whole time, wearing a straitjacket and hood. He tells Bernie they could have all the cake they want if they had a fancy microwave like that family. And we learned that Pop has recently broken Bernie out of the mental hospital where he's been locked up. The sister, Tracy, decides that she's going to leave the camper to smoke and listen to music on her own for a bit before going to bed. She has a sweet sibling interaction with her brother Mark and then heads out. Once all the lights have gone out in the family's camper, Pop takes Bernie outside and undoes his chains, undoes his straitjacket, and hands him an axe. He tells Bernie not to break anything valuable this time and threatens him with sending him back to the hospital if he tries to run away. Bernie does not like this.
Copyright screaming!
Bernie climbs inside the family's camper through a window and murders the three of them off-screen. Tracy has been listening to music in the woods this whole time and is completely oblivious to what's been going on. She heads back to the camper and is greeted by her mother's corpse when she opens the door. When she runs away, Pop yells at Bernie to chase her down, and then he dies of a heart attack as he carries out the family's microwave. Meanwhile, in yet another part of the forest, we see two young men standing outside their car with a lantern. Moonstalker can be seen as a movie in two parts, and this is our introduction to the main characters of part 2. These two men are Ron and Bobby, and they're both part of a camp counselor training program taking place in the woods. They're waiting for the last two counselors in training to show up so they can give them directions to the campsite. Bobby's just in it to meet some hot women, but Ron takes it more seriously and is genuinely concerned with making sure everyone makes it to the campsite safely. We see one of the latecomers, PJ Richards, driving around lost in his red Jeep. He pulls over when he sees the family's camper to get out and ask for directions, but he quickly changes his mind when he literally trips over the severed head of the dad. When he gets back into his Jeep, Bernie strangles him from behind with one of his chains. Meanwhile, the other latecomer has found Ron and Bobby. Her name is Debbie Harris, not to be confused with Debbie Harry, the lead singer of Blondie. She's not very receptive to Bobby's advances, but she and Ron have an almost immediate connection. Tracy, the sister from the family Bernie just murdered, is still running through the dark woods. Shooting at night in the snow proved to be quite the challenge for cinematographer Michael Goy. Director Michael O'Rourke wanted all the snow in these scenes to be undisturbed, so Michael Goy had to test lighting and white balance levels by holding his hand in front of the camera and then basically just guessing. On top of this, they were severely limited in what kind of lights they had for the movie. The only power source they had to plug the lights into was over 1,000 feet away from the shooting location, so the crew had to use extremely long extension cables. The length of the cables, combined with the fact that they were buried in snow, meant the crew was constantly getting shocked anytime they had to move the lights. Knowing all this, it's insane to me that the movie looks as good as it does. As Tracy stumbles lost through the forest, she spots a car passing by on the road and excitedly waves it down. Unfortunately for her, it's Bernie, who's now wearing PJ's clothes, and is also wearing sunglasses at night so he can watch her weave then breathe her story lines. Tracy's not much of a fan of New Wave, and she runs away screaming, for some reason staying on the road instead of running out into the trees where the car can't follow her. Bernie kills her by running her over in a shot that actress Kelly Mullis said she was very excited to film. Debbie is having car troubles and ends up having to abandon her car on the side of the road. Ron and Bobby are getting ready to pack up and head back to camp when Bernie pulls up in his stolen Jeep, nearly running them over. Assuming this is PJ, Ron gives him directions to the campsite and Bernie leaves without saying anything.
PJ, that guy's got a serious attitude problem. But he looks way cooler than that. Let's get the hell out of here.
Ron and Bobby pick up Debbie as they drive back to camp, and Debbie tells them that PJ had nearly run her over too. Ron is getting pretty fed up with PJ's antics at this point and resolves to get him kicked out of the program as soon as they get back. Bernie has already arrived unseen at the camp. We get another POV shot as he peeks inside a couple tents and gets a look at the other counselors in training. Bernie watches as one of the girls goes to the shower tent and meets up with a boy inside there, but he quickly hides away when Ron, Bobby, and Debbie drive up to camp. The couple in the shower tent decide to sneak off to the supply tent to get frisky before the camp meeting starts. Bernie limps all the way back to his log cabin where he and his parents used to live. Inside, he finds a locket and gets really nostalgic as he begins caressing all of his murder tools. Once he's done doing that, he goes outside to sit down with his axe and contemplate murder, past, present, and future. Meanwhile, back at the campsite, Regis, the head counselor, is polishing his revolver as he explains to Ron that he can't expel PJ from the program, because without PJ they won't have enough people to break even for that season. And besides, PJ is already prepaid for the whole course.
Are you out of your mind? I come here to tell you this guy's a maniac, and you tell me he's prepaid.
The couple from the showers are still getting it on inside the supply tent on top of a bunch of comfy-looking sleeping bags. Bernie rips through the top of the tent and kills them both with what appears to be either shears or a giant pair of scissors. Are those the same scissors from Flesh for Frankenstein? Ron shows Debbie to her tent where we meet her roommates. Tent mates. Vicky and Sophie. They both catch on pretty quickly that Ron has a thing for Debbie. Since everyone has now supposedly arrived, there is a group meeting called around the campfire. One of the girls goes looking for Jane, the girl who snuck off and got killed with her boyfriend in the supply tent. She only finds Jane's underwear in the showers and brings it back giggling to the campfire, much to Regis's annoyance. Regis is even more pissed because there are now 3 people missing. He starts lecturing everyone about discipline and then starts waving around the Wilderness Counselor's Certificate, talking about it as if it were an Olympic gold medal or something. Regis was portrayed to perfection by actor John Marzilli, who had actually been in the army, completing boot camp before deciding to leave the army to pursue an acting career. Before appearing in Moonstalker, Marzilli had appeared in several episodes of Tales from the Dark Side, which is where he met actor Neil Kinsella, who plays Deputy Taylor in Moonstalker and was also the assistant director for the film. Tales from the Dark Side also featured John Streisig as a writer and director, and he would go on to work as the production manager on Moonstalker. John Streisig had also directed a short film called The Music of Eric Zahn, where he worked with Michael Goy as his cinematographer. I just wanted to share all this because I thought it was really cool how much of the crew had already known and previously worked with one another. Remember to hold on to those professional connections, folks. You never know who might call you out of the blue one day with a crazy project idea. While Bobby starts making fun of Regis to his face to get the girls to laugh, a police car pulls up to the camp. Regis sends Ron to go see what the officer wants, and Ron is surprised to see that it's not Deputy Taylor, who normally patrols this area. This new guy explains that Deputy Taylor is out with a cold, so he's taking over his patrol for now. He also warns Ron that a family was just found murdered not too far away, so they should all be careful. While Regis goes out on a security patrol, Bobby tells the other trainees the story of Bernie. Apparently, the government had wanted to force Bernie's family off of their property in order to turn the forest into the campgrounds that it is now. Bernie's dad was pissed about this and got into a shootout with the local police, ending in the accidental death of Bernie's mother and his father getting arrested. But Bernie escaped, and when the campsites were finally opened, he started killing the campers, blaming them for what had happened to his family. Eventually, he was caught and locked away in a mental institution. Regis's wife Marcy decides to prepare for his return by dressing down to a camo bikini and war paint, and blasting Ride of the Valkyries on their boombox, just in case there was any confusion as to whether Regis used to be in the army or not. Bernie appears in the entrance to the tent, and Marcy threatens to cut him off at the knees if he doesn't back off. Evidently possessing a strong sense of irony, Bernie kills her by cutting her off at the knees. This scene is also especially impressive considering that Marcy's actress was only wearing a bikini during a night shoot in the snow. Eventually, all the counselors in training decide to call it a night, so they begin heading back to their tents. Debbie asks Ron if the story about Bernie is true, and Ron replies that not only is it true, but Bernie's murder cabin is still standing out in the woods nearby. Debbie asks Ron to take her to go out and see the cabin, and even though going to a mass murderer's cabin in the middle of the night sounds pretty scary, Ron reluctantly agrees, cause hey, Debbie's pretty. Sophie invites a male counselor to take a shower with her. I'm pretty sure we never learn his name throughout the movie, and he blatantly only exists to give Bernie another victim. Meanwhile, Bobby has gone off to the supply tent on his own to sulk for a bit, thinking he's made a fool of himself in front of the girls. Vicky decides to crash his pity party, and over the next few scenes, we get to see them bonding in a genuinely heartwarming performance from both actors. Before they leave to make their own private campfire and share a sleeping bag, they notice a large hole torn into the top of the tent. Regis has finished his security check and returns to his tent to find Marcy's dead body with her severed legs hanging down from the implausible second level of the tent. Bernie pops up out of nowhere and cuts off Regis's arm when he goes for his gun. Then Bernie picks up the gun, arm still attached, and uses it to feed Regis an unhealthy serving of lead. The first time I watched the movie, I thought to myself that the blood splatter behind Regis's head looked kind of small, and that was actually unintentional. Due to the cold, the fake blood they were using for this shot had frozen solid, and despite the effects team's best efforts, they couldn't get it to completely melt. So they wound up having to lob this ball of half-congealed fake blood at the tent wall just to have any kind of splatter effect. Ron and Debbie are continuing their hike to the murder cabin when they accidentally slip and fall on a frozen lake, landing in freezing cold water. They hurry the rest of the way to Bernie's cabin in order to warm up. Someone who's having no problem getting warm right now is Sophie, since unseen, Bernie has turned the hot water of the shower up so high that when Sophie gets into the shower, face first for some reason, she receives some nasty-looking third-degree burns on her face. Her unnamed boyfriend is hacked to death by Bernie when he tries to run for help. Ron and Debbie make it to the cabin and briefly examine the interior, including the wall of murder tools. Ron starts a fire and they both take off their clothes to dry them, and then get cozy together under a blanket. Their moment of intimacy is intercut with shots of Bernie doing what he does best, hacking limbs and posing dead bodies. Back at the first family's murder site, a large group of police officers is gathered to make sense of the massacre they've found. Deputy Taylor, still suffering from a head cold, has turned up to take a look, and is horrified when he recognizes Bernie's father amongst the dead bodies. He quickly gets back into his car, mumbling about Bernie being back, but the other cops don't take him seriously, thinking he's got a couple screws loose. Bobby and Vicky have set up their romantic campfire together, and are having a genuinely adorable conversation where Bobby admits he's never been with a girl before. They're about to get even more comfy in their sleeping bag, but when Bobby unrolls it, a severed arm falls out. He insists that it must have been a prank from some previous campers, but the mood is ruined, so they decide to just head back to camp, with Bernie limping after them. Bobby realizes there's someone following them and takes Vicky behind a tree to hide as Bernie passes by. Thinking that it's PJ, Bobby jumps out and challenges him to a fight, which Bernie quickly wins by throwing a knife into Bobby's forehead. Vicky runs screaming back to the camp, where instead of finding help, she finds a bunch of dead bodies in tents. Bernie has used some of that classic slasher movie magic to get back to camp before Vicky, despite us never seeing him move faster than a limp. And he's taken the opportunity to sabotage a couple of the cars that are parked there. Vicky struggles to get a car started until she is attacked by Bernie and the screen goes black. During all of this, Deputy Taylor's car is broken down in the snow and he's been walking the rest of the way to the camp. He sees a group of people sitting around a bonfire singing camp songs and approaches them to warn them about the killer that's on the loose. But once he reaches them, he realizes to his horror that these are actually all the dead bodies of the people Bernie has already killed, strung up with rope and wood in a macabre puppet show, which for me is the most memorable image from this movie. Taylor sees that Vicky is hanging from a tree with a rope around her neck, but is still alive, so he goes to try untying the rope to let her down. Unfortunately, Bernie has become one with the squirrels, and he throws a spear from his hiding spot on a nearby branch, impaling Deputy Taylor, causing him to drop the rope, which causes Vicky to fall and break her neck. Back at Bernie's murder cabin, Ron and Debbie's clothes have finally dried off, so they're getting ready to head back to camp now. They stand on the porch for a few moments and smile at each other, taking in this budding romance between the two of them. But then, out of nowhere, it's Bernie with an axe! He kills Ron with an axe to the back, and Debbie runs back inside the cabin, hiding in the room of murder tools. She picks up a machete and swings when she sees a head poke through the door, but it turns out to be one of the police officers we saw earlier at the first crime scene. When did this happen? I guess either the deputy had come in and knocked out Bernie first and then was checking on Debbie, or maybe Bernie had actually killed the officer already and was sticking her body in through the door as a fake out. Either way, really bizarre scene. When Debbie leaves the murder tool room, Bernie is apparently unconscious on the floor, but he pulls a Michael Myers and attacks her as she tries leaving the cabin. There's some more running through the snow, yada yada, and then Debbie gets back to camp, gets inside a police car, and picks up the shotgun that's still inside. A familiar-looking face wearing sunglasses and a cowboy hat peeks in, and she shoots him. The next morning, we see there's a small army of cops at the campsite trying to make sense of the massacre. Through a passing ambulance, we see that Deputy Taylor is somehow still alive, and Debbie is in the midst of a full-blown mental breakdown. A red Jeep drives by, and as the driver slowly passes, we see that it's Bernie, now wearing a stolen police uniform. This is the point where I had to go back and confirm that yes, the person Debbie shot through the window was not Bernie, but was actually the first cop who had driven up to talk to Ron at the campsite. So depending on what happened at the cabin, Debbie may have just killed 2 people, neither of them the murderer. No wonder she's having a mental breakdown. Oh, also, that's the end of the movie. Oh, man, what a blast this movie was. If you like 80s slashers, I highly recommend you watch this one. One of the most common problems that I have with slashers is that the pacing can be all over the place, with exciting chase scenes and gory deaths bookended by long scenes of nothing happening besides bad acting. I found this not to be the case with Moonstalker, which certainly maintains a certain level of cheese throughout, but is always enjoyable, and has a fair amount of likable characters, which is also a rarity for a lot of slashers of this era. As always, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I'm always so glad to see there's other weirdos out there like me who like watching these weird old movies. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more from this channel, and remember, stay weird.